So I'm going to call our meeting of the St. Louis Park School District Number 283 meeting to order for October 28, 2019. And we're going to start with a spotlight. And it's the 2020 National Merit Scholarship Program recognition. What we'll do is we'll have, in a minute, I'll have Scott Myers, principal of the high school, go up, and he will call out the National Merit Scholarship winners, and Aston and I will be very pleased to shake your hands and congratulate you on behalf of the board. And then when we're all done, we'll have a photo taken by Flower. Okay, just heads up. All right, so thanks everybody. Let's get started. Scott Myers, principal of the high school, to kick off our spotlight of the 2020 National Merit Scholarship Program.
All right, well, good evening. Thank you so much, Superintendent Osai and members of the school board, for allowing me to brag about some of our amazing students. It's my great honor as a principal of St. Louis Park High School to recognize these amazing students I'm about to introduce. Not only have these students worked hard and represented St. Louis Park well, they've also gained recognition in our state and national level. Many times, actually. As I was writing this, I thought there's many things I could talk about with our school newspaper, National Honor Society, things like that, where they're representing really well. One of these honors these students have received is an acknowledgement in the National Merit Scholarship Competition. And here's just a brief overview of what a big honor this is. Over 1.5 million students took the 2018 Preliminary SAT Scholarship Qualifying Test, also known as the PSAT in the school. They took this test last October, and by taking this exam, they were entered into the National Merit Scholar Program, a nationwide competition for recognition and awards conducted by the National Merit Scholarship Corporation. In April, the National Merit Scholarship Corporation identified 50,000 of the highest scoring students of that 1.5 million that tested, and these students were notified in their high schools as for their commendation. 34,000 students were actually designated as commended according to the National Commended Student Selection Index score. And then 16,000 of the highest performers were designated semifinalists on a state representational basis. These seniors have the opportunity to continue in the competition for some 7,600 national merit scholarships worth $31 million. Tonight, we'd like to recognize these students for their accomplishment in the National Merit Scholarship Competition so far, and we wish them luck if they choose to continue. So at this time, I'd like to call up the students to be recognized by our school board. Students that are here with your families, please come up as you hear your name. All right. Our first student, Patrick Djerf, was unable to join us tonight, but we will pass along his award of excellence to a family member with us tonight. Mari Hanchi was also unable to join us tonight, but we do have I'll have this delivered to her tomorrow at school. I'll keep those with me. All right, Marta Hill, will you come up, please? All right, yep, please remember to stay up here for a photo. Yoni Potter, come on up. All right, and Mitchell VonEschen. All right, Eitan Weinstein. All right. And then also unable to join us tonight was Gabriella Thomas. So can we give her a round of applause in recognition? All right. These are our National Merit recognized students. And I think we're going to transition into a photo here. So thank you for the time.
Can I say something real quick? If you'd indulge us, we do this every year. And since there's only 4 of you, could each one of you come up and say something, give a shout out to your parents, talk about what you might want to study in the future, and if you have a school of choice or a future endeavor of choice, let us know that as well. Please.
Okay, hi, I'm Eitan Weinstein. Sorry, my voice is kind of dying here. So first, definitely, I want to thank my parents for, inspiring me to work hard in high school and to want to learn things, and also all of my teachers who have given me the resources and opportunities to do well in high school. Going into college, I want to study physics and environmental science. Ultimately, I want to work in researching sustainable energy, and I was inspired for this by taking APES in 9th grade. It really changed my worldview and made me want to be involved in the process for cleaning the planet and making sustainable energy realistic and commercially available. Thank you.
I'm Mitchell. I definitely shout out my parents. I think they raised me really well. And what I want to do is study jazz at a music conservatory, and I also want to study math and neuroscience and psychology because I'm interested in artificial intelligence and the future technology that could bring. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Yoni Potter, and I'd like to thank my parents. They've raised me really well and taught me all my values, and I really appreciate all that you've done for me and my whole family. And I also really appreciate all the teachers at the school who have done just such an amazing job inspiring me. And yeah, I'm sort of undecided as to what I want to study, but I definitely know that I want to look into some sort of social issue that still exists in our society and a way that I can change that. Thank you.
And I am Marta. I, again, also want to thank my parents for supporting me all the way to now, and I know they will continue to, and teachers, because without teachers, I would not enjoy school as much. In future, I want to study something in STEM fields. I don't know what yet. It could be math, it could be engineering. We'll see what happens. But I am excited to continue to learn about the things that I'm passionate about, which currently include journalism and math and most of the sciences.
Yeah. You gotta come forward and into the light. Come this way, like we're gonna look this way.
Scott, you're good right there in that window.
Is that gonna work?
Yep.
It's all the right way up, yes. Parents, feel free. Thank you. Thank you all so much. This is great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. It's always such a fun way to start out our meetings with our students and their great success and their inspiration and hope for our future. So thank you all, and thank your parents for all that you've done for all of us. All right, first up now, we have approval of the agenda. And on the agenda, we start with open forum, followed by the superintendent's report, discussion items, enrollment data update, elementary schools, continuous improvement planning process, city land usage at Peter Hobart Elementary, policy development, first reading policy 424, policy development second reading 524. Then we'll have the consent agenda, our action agenda, which includes use of facilities cooperative agreement, labor agreement, custodial services, resolution to create an internal service fund for self-insurance, approval of second reading of policies 524, communication and transmittals, and adjournment. Oh, and the second reading also includes 524 student internet acceptable use and safety and 806 crisis management. So is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Moved by Karen, is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Jim. All in favor? Aye. Carries 6-0. So the first item up is open forum. Is there anybody here who wishes to address the school board on open forum? All right, seeing no one, we will move on to the superintendent's report. Aston's getting himself set up there, so we'll give him a minute to do that.
Appears that having a challenge with the internet connection, so I'm just going to switch over to a hotspot on my phone, and we'll be set. Chair Gores, members of the board, sorry about that technical difficulty. It makes me wonder, what did human beings do before there was technology, right? For my report this evening, I would just like to highlight a couple of informational items. As you all are aware, this past Saturday, October 26th, we hosted our first parade of schools, really connected to all of the work that had been done this past summer at Aquila, at Park Spanish Immersion, and at the high school. And I just want to take a moment to thank all of our staff, our Aquila staff, our leaders, and all of the custodians and teachers that came in, all of our staff at Park Spanish Immersion, and all of the teachers and custodians that came in, and all of our high school staff, teachers and custodians, to really create a welcoming environment for our community to come in and have an opportunity to explore all of our new facilities. I would say that it was moderately attended. I would say the place that was attended the best was Park Spanish Immersion, and it was really neat to see a lot of Cedar Manor teachers come back and see all of the changes that had occurred at the building. So thank you to all of the staff members that helped to create that opportunity for our community. And I know as we put new spaces on in the upcoming school year, that will create additional opportunity for the community to see the facilities. The next item that I wanted to share was just to take a moment to acknowledge our high school newspaper, The Echo. As all of you are aware, we have one of the top high school newspapers in the country, and this year is no different. The Echo was one of 49 National Pacemaker newspaper finalists selected by the National Scholastic Press Association. And The Echo has been named a national newspaper pacemaker finalist every year since 2013. So I just want to take a moment to acknowledge the advisor, Lori Keekley, and all of the students that participate in the Echo for their tremendous accomplishments in journalism here in St. Louis Park Public Schools. And the last piece that I would like to do it as we are on this national recognition spotlight is just take a moment to highlight and spotlight our racial equity instructional coaches. 2 weeks ago at the National Summit for Courageous Conversations, they were awarded with the 2019 Learning and Teaching Award. And for the first time ever, this organization awarded a group of teachers for this award. It's generally an award that an individual teacher receives, but because of the work of this group that they're doing, the organization felt that the whole entire group should be acknowledged. So it's a tremendous accomplishment, and it really speaks to the work that we're doing here to truly help to energize and enhance each student's spirit. And that concludes my report for the evening.
Thank you, Aston. Appreciate that. So first up, we have an enrollment data update by Patricia Magnuson, Director of Business Services.
Good evening, Chair Gore, Superintendent Osai, and board members. The presentation tonight has two purposes. First, to just provide you with an overview of our fall 2019 enrollment and compare that to projections, and then to outline some data points that we're looking at to inform our preliminary thinking as we start to plan for fiscal year 2021 budget, and enrollment being one of the major components of that. This chart is just a by school, by grade snapshot of enrollment, and this is as of October 21st. We're still working through the MARS reporting, and enrollment will be finalized. The October 1 data will be finalized later in the fall. So this is probably a closer reflection of what our official October 1 data will look like. And there's just a couple of things that I want you to look at. If you go to the bottom right-hand corner, our total enrollment this fall in grades K through 12 in these schools is 4,618 students. And if you look along the right-hand side, you can see the totals by school. So you can see of our 4 elementary schools, Aquila Elementary continues to be our largest school. And if you go along the bottom, I want you to look at the kindergarten number all the way to the bottom, the column that's titled K, and you'll see a number of 393. And if you look across at all of the grade levels, that kindergarten class is currently the largest class in our K-12 system. So that's really good news for the future. And it's actually 60 students larger, you can see, than our current first grade class. So it's substantially larger, and it's actually also larger than what we had projected. And I'm going to start talking to you now a little bit about the variances we're looking at. And it's those variances and those patterns and changes in patterns that we'll look at as we try to establish enrollment projections for next fall. So this chart, it's very, very busy, but it takes that same set of schools and grades and tells us where we had a variance from what we predicted we would have from this fall. And all of those predictions are based on past patterns and trends. And I'll talk to you a little bit about those, but any cell in this chart that's red, and I hope this shows up well enough, means that it's greater than 5 students above what we thought we'd have in that grade level and school. And if it's in yellow, it means it's 5 or more students below projections, and the others, of course, are within that 5 student range of what we had projected. You can see all across the board in kindergarten, we're up 41 students from what we had projected. And that's, we'll look at capture rates in a little bit, but for right now, we're 41 students above, mostly at Aquila and Peter Hobart. The middle school, if you go over to the right-hand side and look at all of the different schools in the system, the middle school at 31 students above projections is the school with the highest number at a school that's above projections. And Peter Hobart is the largest elementary school above projections. So that's fairly good news. We can see places where the patterns are holding. We're going to have to really look at kindergarten. We did some different things with open enrollment, holding open enrollment open at the middle school. And so some of these are based on things that we did. We intervened to make sure that enrollment hit numbers. In some places, we're just going to have to look at patterning to see what might have changed. And it'll take a while to dig into the data. This is some another marker we look at. So what you're seeing here is the last 5 years, and this is preliminary data for 2020, just keeping in mind that we're still finalizing all of our MARS data. But what it tells us is the total enrollment in grades K through 12 from fiscal year 2016 through this current year, fiscal year 2020. And we're at 4,618. So that fall enrollment number is about as high as it's been in the last 5 years, but the really important numbers are in that fine print. We are up 41 students from last year. So that's a growth year over year of 0.9%. And if you look at that number and that growth rate for in the previous 4 years, it's the highest it's been. So then as we break it down and start looking at kindergarten capture rates, the way that I've laid out capture rate here is comparing St. Louis Park's public schools kindergarten number as compared to the births in Hennepin County 5 years ago. It's one of the predictors school districts use. We can also zone in on zip codes, but for this exercise, we used Hennepin County in total. And so what we're looking at in the chart is the data that feeds into the graph below. And what I want you to see in the graph is you've got 4 years of history, and in our current year, our preliminary data tells us that we captured, so from births 5 years ago, 2.34% is our capture rate for kindergarten for this fall. That's the highest capture rate we have in these previous years, and a very small change in that percentage point makes a big difference. We had predicted that we'd have about a 2.1% capture rate, sort of based on the history and on that dip in last year's kindergarten number, and this year now we're up to 2.34%. So you can see why we had that variance in kindergarten. And we did make some adjustments with classroom teachers to reflect that change. So that's kindergarten. And so then let's just look at overall in our grade groupings. So we have our elementary grade groupings in grades K through 5, and that's in that gray chart at the bottom, or the gray line at the bottom, and then secondary grade groupings, grades 6 through 12 along the top. And you can see the trends here that we have a steadily growing number over time from fiscal year 2016 to 2020 in that top line, which tells us that our numbers are growing over time at secondary. We had sort of the opposite happening in the elementary grade groupings, a decline over years, and now suddenly this fall, there's a change in that pattern. So what we have to dig into as we learn more about the data and the student activity there, is that trend up going to continue, or will we revert backward? And we have more data to look at as we work toward finalizing our enrollment projections later this year. This is a really important marker in the public school marketplace as we sort of look at the idea of competition and retaining our own students, which is a part of our strategic priority results as well. What you're looking at here is a combination graph. What we're trying to show is this stacked bar showing students that opt out. That's the bottom bar in gray, meaning in each of these years in the public school arena, where you can choose one public school district and another independent public school district, those are the number of students that opt out of St. Louis Park for another public school district. Sort of new-ish to the marketplace, not so new anymore, are charter schools, which are also public schools. You can only gain, you can only lose to a charter school. We can't gain back, obviously, from a charter school because they just enroll students. So you can see over time the trends in charter schools. So back at 156, that number has grown all the way to 236. And then what we're trying to show with the line across the top is the families that are opting in to St. Louis Park public schools from other public school districts. So they are like the students in gray. But what we're trying to exhibit here is that even when you include charter schools out, in the public school marketplace, St. Louis Park is a net gainer when you combine both options out and charter school out. Now, what this doesn't include are private school students and homeschooled students, which it's a little more difficult to gather the data about that. But for families that choose public school as their option, St. Louis Park is historically a net gainer. So then you might want to think about the capture rate. So like kindergarten, how many were we capturing of Hennepin County? So this chart it's one way of showing of those families that choose public school, either an independent school district like St. Louis Park or a charter school, which is a free public education. What percentage are we capturing of those families that are out in the market looking for public school? And this year, if you go way over to the right, we don't have data yet for fiscal year 2020. So the latest data is for 19. You can see that we've captured about 3,738 of our residents into St. Louis Park. The gray are those families that opt out into another public school option, and the light orange are families that opt out into a charter school. So we're capturing about 83.89% of our residents who choose a public option. That's been slowly declining over time. Now, what will be interesting is when we can add the information about this fall, fiscal year 2020. Did that change in kindergarten spike this number back up? So what are we experiencing overall? That's an important number to watch. So then, where are these children and families going? So if we look at other public school options, what we did is went through the MARS data and looked at the other public schools that enroll 20 or more St. Louis Park resident students. And so the first set of columns is a little analysis of fiscal year 19, and then we just compared the net number for 18 and 17. So what you see here is that St. Louis Park is a net gainer of open enrolled students from Minneapolis at 378 net, and from Robbinsdale at 73 as a net gainer. But we are a net sort of loser in open enrollment to Hopkins, Edina, and Minnetonka. And then if you also look at charter schools, which are the largest charter schools that families are choosing? So we pulled the charter schools that enroll 20 or more of our resident students. There's 3 of them. Agamemnon Classical Academy, the International Spanish Language Academy, and Eagle Ridge Academy. And I know a little bit about them. I looked at their websites. Agamemnon is a K-8 school. It's in Edina. It advertises classical virtues, languages, and American values. The International Spanish Language Academy is Minnetonka. It's K-6, and it's an IB primary years program. And Eagle Ridge is a K-12 school in Minnetonka, and it advertises itself as a college prep, classical liberal arts education.
Patricia, before you go on, do you have data on our capture rate as it compares to other districts?
Yeah, I pulled just the districts that are listed here. I did the same exercise using their fiscal year 19 MARS data from the MDE website. Now, in another district, they might calculate capture rate differently, so I don't want to pretend that I understand how another district might look at their capture rate, but using the exact same methodology that I used. So if we were at 83%, and you can compare that to Minneapolis at 64%. Hopkins is about 70%, 71%. Edina, or Robbinsdale about 75%. So we fare better, if better is the way you want to look at that. But then in Edina and Minnetonka, they are capturing about 96%. 97% almost for Minnetonka of their residents, using that same methodology.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So what we're going to do next, there's a lot about this data that informs the work that we do. First and foremost, we want to serve our families here in St. Louis Park. So, of course, enrollment is an important marker of our budget. But it's also fits with our Strategy 3 and our strategic plan around community collaboration. In particular, the result that we will implement a marketing plan to increase enrollment of resident students and with a focus on kindergarten. So data will really inform the work that we do around that. We're working on some technology so that we can have online enrollment available. Will be available for next fall, but we are also working to just improve the process for kindergarten, the experience families have, doing some marketing around kindergarten, and conversations that we've been having with families who choose other school districts. So that's going to be a focus of ours, and it's an important set of data points as a beginning to our budgeting process. So that's the presentation for enrollment, and I will probably be back sometime as part of the budgeting process once we finalize the trends that we think will be coming for next year.
Anyone have any questions on this part? Yes, Karen?
So just briefly, Patricia, this is really excellent, and you've asked us to keep our budget books with us and up to date, and when you bring us back to the next round of the budget planning cycle, having these as tabs to put in would be
sure.
really helpful. Thank you so much.
Yes, you're welcome.
Anyone else have any questions on this part of the presentation? Okay, go ahead, Patricia.
Thank you.
Thank you, Patricia. So next up, we have our elementary schools continuous improvement planning process, and we'll let Patrick Duffy, our Director of Teaching, no, what's his title? Curriculum and Instruction, kick this off. Thanks, Patrick.
Hi, good evening. Chair Gores, members of the board, Superintendent Osai. It's my pleasure to be here tonight. I'm representing the teaching and learning team, which includes Sylvie Lafayette, Tammy Reynolds, Frida Bailey, and Tom Marble. And I represent that team because we work in collaboration with our elementary principals to help them meet the goals of their continuous improvement plans. Our continuous improvement planning process really is about working collaboratively with their teachers and with their entire school community to look at how they can make sure that they're meeting all of the outcomes that are outlined in our mission and our strategic plan. The purpose of the presentation tonight is to share the goals, strategies, and measures of success connected to the elementary school continuous improvement plans for the 2019-20 school year. The continuous improvement plan process really started this summer. And in June, principals came together with members of our district leadership team as well, and really reflected upon the last year and looked at how goals and outcomes were met or may not have been met based on the work that was done. We came back together in August in a series of leadership retreats and then in a data advance to look at how numerous aspects of our data could inform the plans that we wanted to make strategically at each site to make sure that we were meeting our goals. These plans would look at a number of ways at measuring student growth as well, not just tests, but also looking at multiple ways that teachers could identify whether or not where students were growing in their classes. What I will say is in my work with elementary principals, and I would say this could be echoed by many of the members of our district leadership team, I see other ways that principals are engaging with their staff to ensure that there's continuous improvement. And this comes in many ways that are hard to measure, but I would say I see so much evidence of joy in the learning of our children in our elementary classrooms. I see when I'm walking with principals through the hallway, students running up to them, giving them a hug or giving them a high five and calling them by name. And I see our principals working intentionally with their teachers, not just as coaches, but also as lead learners, trying to find ways to work on both the systemic needs and inequities that may be present within our system, but also working on their own personal growth as they try to find ways to transform the way that they can lead, the way that they can teach, and the way that they can serve our communities. So it is my pleasure to welcome up our elementary principals tonight, who will share a bit about their continuous improvement plans, as well as the work that they're doing that they are proud of, and the work that they see that still needs to be done. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. And I'll let each of you introduce yourself and your school as you step up to the mic, because if I do it all at once, the home viewer won't remember what I've said.
Great, thank you. Well, good evening, St. Louis Park community, Superintendent Osai, school board, district staff. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to be here tonight. My name is Shelley Nielsen. I'm the principal at Aquila Elementary. And I will be presenting tonight along with Olivia Tolzien, who is the assistant principal. I'm excited both to reflect about last year and also to share where we are now and the goals that we have for this year. I'm going to start first by reflecting on last year. And we had many successes as I think back to last year, and I'm really proud of that, but I'm going to highlight just two tonight. One thing that really stood out for the year was a clear focus on student agency, which is really at the heart of our IB Years program. And student agency is really the voice, choice, and ownership that we see in our classrooms that helps guide our student learning. It's really the focus of allowing students to stay engaged and present throughout the lesson, and we often would find that throughout the year, this is one of those things where if I asked staff right now, what is one thing that was on our site improvement plan from last year, they would say, well, student agency, because we continue to talk about it all throughout the year. And during our staff meetings, staff would come and say, hey, this is how I brought student agency back into my classroom. And honestly, as I look back at that, I think we see students they're more motivated, and they can truly show up as their true, authentic self when we allow them to have some choice in their education. So that would be one thing that I would book as a highlight. The second thing would be that we had a steep drop in our behavior referrals from the year previously, and I would say that was a lot of intentional work to our restorative practices that we're putting into place. I'm also really proud of the fact that if you were to look at our behavior referrals from last year, we are now more closely reflecting on our demographic enrollment. So you see an alignment. The two of those are more closely aligned. If I am going to look at challenges from last year, there's really two that I'm gonna highlight. Olivia and I were new leaders working together. Olivia's not new to Aquila, but we were new leaders coming together, and that brought a lot of energy to the data retreat. Our team really set aggressive goals. That was great. I'm really happy that we set aggressive goals. We also set a lot of strategies to achieve those goals. And it was really clear mid-year that we had way too many strategies on our plate. We couldn't keep all of that going. And we had to, at that point, take some of those strategies off our site improvement plan and focus in on the things that we knew that we could do well, because I think we all know that when you put too many things on your plate, you don't do anything really well. So the second half of the year, when we honed in on just a few things and we really focused there, we saw more progress. The second thing was really our limited professional development time with staff. It's really clear that you don't have a lot of time with staff, and Olivia and I really struggled to keep this time sacred. A lot of people want to have time in front of your staff, and we truly had a hard time saying no. So what happened is some things took the side burner, and we didn't put the focus where it needed to be. We're better this year at saying no to that. And I'm going to be honest, I'm going to remind you about last winter. We had snow days, cold days, and late starts. That impacted PD as well. So two things that really kind of stood out to me as a challenge. There were other things like construction, but that's behind us now. So next slide. I'm actually going to put all four of these up. What you're looking at here in this slide is our 2019-20 Continuous Improvement Plan. This was created at this year's Data Advance in August. All of the strategies that you see are focused to help us achieve our building goal. And this year's building goal is to decrease the achievement gap that exists between Black and white students in reading, while focusing on every student meeting or exceeding their typical growth goals K through 5. The strategies, all of them, are aligned to help us fulfill our district mission of challenging all learners to meet high standards and to provide a safe and nurturing environment that energizes and enhances the spirit. So Livy and I are going to highlight a few and go a little bit deeper on some of the strategies that you see on the screen. And I'll start with equity leadership. So as leaders in equity, both Olivia and I are participating in the Mankato cohorts for courageous leadership. We know that it is essential to continue to grow and develop our own racial consciousness as white female leaders. We need to do this in order to interrupt the practices and structures that perpetuate the predictable achievement patterns that we see. At the data advance, and now I'm going to drop us down to looking over at students at the center. At the data advance, we felt we really needed to look at how we were meeting the needs of the whole child, socially, emotionally, physically, as well as academically in Tier 1. And I'm going to remind you that Tier 1 is what happens in a regular classroom by the core teacher. Our data advance team was looking at our social emotional support, which often is sidelined and given to our counselors and our social workers, and saying that we needed to build our capacity as a staff in this area. Not only did we need to build our capacity, but we needed to build our capacity with our students. So the plan in this particular area is that our social worker, our school psychologist, and our counselor developed 3 lessons that are taught every single month. They teach 2 lessons to our staff. That's building our capacity. Then our teachers turn around and teach the students. That's that train the trainer approach. And then the 3rd lesson is actually taught by either the counselor or the psychologist or the social worker and taught in the classroom tandem with the teacher. It is the way that we're working it. We started out with the first month working with zones of regulation. These next 2 months, both October and November, we're now working with restorative circles. And I'm going to turn it over to Olivia. She's going to talk about the next 2 areas.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Olivia Tolzien, and I'm the assistant principal at Aquila. I'm going to be sharing with you some information on how our school is working on culturally relevant teaching and learning, as well as family and community engagement in our continuous improvement plan. To honor the practices of an IB World School, Shelley and I decided to form a pedagogical leadership team that would evaluate our current teaching practices. Our pedagogical team is committed to helping our teachers and our students meet our continuous improvement goals. Our team identified that we needed to continue our work with Strategy 1 so that we can systematically align our practices to meet student outcomes by aligning our instruction, curriculum, assessment in a culturally relevant manner. Currently, our teachers are collaborating to write a reading strategy lesson plans that incorporate our knowledge of culturally relevant teaching and connecting that work with highly effective teaching practices. To determine if our lessons are effective and if our students are meeting or exceeding academic standards, our teams are using the Collaborative Action Research for Equity model to review our work, or CARE model. The CARE model asks us to identify student learning goals, develop and implement culturally relevant teaching lessons, collaborate to analyze our student data, isolate race, and determine the next steps to transform our student learning. Our CARE teams have scheduled purposeful collaborative time with our multilingual teachers. We know that we have students in our school, many students in our school, that speak more than one language, particularly in 1st, 2nd, and 4th grades. As an IB World School, we want to honor our students' native languages and support their growth in learning English as an additional language. Through this teaching partnership between our classroom teachers and our multilingual teachers, we are building our capacity to best meet the needs of our students who are learning English as an additional language during core or Tier 1 instruction. And to best meet the needs of all of our learners, we know that it is imperative that we have meaningful, authentic relationships with our families. And as you can see, Aquila has planned to have many opportunities to build partnerships with our learning community so that we can hear their voice and we have the multiple perspectives needed to ensure the success of our students. A few examples include our Somali and Latino family nights, our family conferences, and most recently, we had a kindergarten transition meeting for our African American and Native American families. Shelley and I believe it's important to gather evidence to measure the success of our strategies. And so we will continue to use that care model to provide us with feedback about student achievement throughout our whole school year. We will continue to monitor behavior referrals monthly to determine if our social emotional lessons are being effective for our students. And it is our hope as administrators to not get caught up in a single data point or even a few data points to define the success of our students or our staff. We are going to look at multiple indicators to measure the growth and successes. And in closing, and in the spirit of Ubuntu, Shelley and I are excited about the collaborative work that we are doing at Aquila thus far. As our students continue to grow to their highest potential, it is our hope that we can also provide time and space to allow them to consider who they are and the kind of world that they want to live in. And the staff at Aquila are thankful to be part of that educational journey. So thank you for having us.
I think I'll just pause for just a second and just ask if anybody, we'll have questions at the end, but if there are any questions now. And I'm going to start with one. I just had the great good fortune to be on a civil rights trip down south, and so when I hear you talk about a strategy of isolating race, I'm hearing that in a very negative way, and I know that's not what you mean. So I would like to have you explain how that is a positive learning strategy and what you mean by that.
So in our instruction, we are always looking at if our students are meeting or exceeding our standards. And we look at assessment to make sure that we are doing that. And when we look at our assessments and we're looking at our students who are meeting or exceeding standards, we isolate race by saying, are the students that are meeting and exceeding white, black, brown, what are their languages? We look at it deeper to see how do we best meet the needs of our students and how do we partner with their families.
And that's part of the strategy of closing the achievement gap, I'm assuming?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. You may get questions later.
Buenas tardes. My name is Corey Mizlowski. I have the privilege of being the proud principal of Park Spanish Immersion Elementary School. We changed the name over the summer. I'm grateful to have time to tell you about our journey last year, as well as to share reflections and action on behalf of our 513 amazingly gifted students and their families. And the reason why I say amazingly gifted is because every single one of our kids is gifted in his or her own way. And it's our job as adults to try and help them become the very best learners that they can be and the very best people that they can be. So if we think about what went well last year, I think we were really encouraged through our SIP plan to focus on less. Less is more. And so I feel like we were able to go deeper rather than having a bunch of strategies and not doing anything to depth. And so I feel like last year, and our staff commented on it at the end of the year, that we did deeper, more intentional focus on our reading strategies. We offered a lot of dedicated professional development time. Teachers worked with our teacher on special assignment to plan, implement, dialogue, plan, and implement guided reading instruction. Within that, we took a look at running records, error analysis, reading strategies, as well as inter-rater reliability. We also worked with an external immersion consultant group to help us look at what is best practice, what is currently happening across the country in immersion, in particular related to literacy. We took a look at student language production, writing, as well as student feedback. Working with our steering committee, we undertook creating a frequently asked questions document related to reading at home, which required significant discussion and analysis of adult beliefs related to reading homework. We tried to tease out what was best practice and evidence-based versus what was the way that we've always done it or what we personally believe. And so as a result, we were able to share a consistent message with our families this fall because that was the one thing, as we've scaled back on homework and reading is the biggest thing that kids do at home, parents were asking, how can we best support our kids? What can we best be doing? And we were giving a lot of different answers based on what people felt. And so we now have a consistent document to help support all of our learners. What were some of the challenges? Well, we might have been overly ambitious in what we could accomplish during a rather large transition year for us, We underestimated the amount of time that would be needed related to the move. We had extra meetings related to furniture, fixtures, room placement, outdoor space, as well as helping adults navigate change theory and giving them the language to talk about how they were feeling. Tied to that, as Shelley alluded to, we had cold weather days and bumping of professional development based on other things that had to come up. And so we didn't gain as much traction during the second part of the year related to math and also allowing people to share, having people share student voice and to plan and inform their work. And so based on that, this summer we met and had an opportunity of taking a look at where did we want to head this year. And so the first box is related to equity leadership. And we know that we teach who we are, so we're continued and committed to take a look at ourselves racially, take a look at how our past and how our present impacts our teaching and learning. And a big piece of that is related to individual journaling and reflection, and then implementation. So at the beginning of every we're focusing particularly on our relationships with our students and our families, as well as pedagogical best practices related to immersion programming during this first part of the year. We've been focusing on giving access to all students, and when I say access, paying particular attention to content obligatory and content compatible language, being that for the majority of our learners, Spanish is not their first language, and we're doing all of our content through language. It's important that we're thinking about the language in use and the language that kids are going to need in order to access science or math or social studies, because if we're not intentionally thinking about that, and if we're not putting that language out there, kids are naturally going to revert to English, or in some cases they might just shut down because they don't have access to the content that's in front of them. So we've been paying a lot of attention to that, as well as ensuring that students have the opportunity of having voice within the classroom. We have a cohort of teachers that are currently, we have 4 teachers who have been working with the University of Minnesota getting their license on dual language instruction and immersion education. Dual language is the umbrella term now from the national level for immersion education. And as a result, they've been leading professional development amongst our staff. As we often take a look at what are other people doing, we have the latest and greatest research based out of here at the University of Minnesota. Related to students at the center, I've already alluded to student oral language proficiency, but there are some guiding principles under which we're operating. One being that those doing the talking should be doing the learning, right? So less teacher talk. Oral language being the center of literacy, student collaboration being critical to language production and language learning, and student needing to acquire and produce academic language. As well as taking a look at, related to culturally relevant teaching and learning, we're working on a somewhat innovative schedule that each teacher will have the opportunity to observe a colleague within every month, reflecting on their own teaching and learning, so not necessarily critiquing their colleagues, but taking a look at what their colleagues are doing related to our professional development, and then once again journaling and how can that enhance my own learning. Often, in the past, when we've encouraged people to do that, it may happen here or there, but we're actually creating a system where they'll be able to do that during the day. Also, continuing to celebrate all of our students through different heritage months. And so we just finished Hispanic Heritage Month, and one of the things that we did differently this year was we're asking every teacher to take a month and to develop some specific lessons that are culturally relevant that then they're modeling and then sending it out to the entire staff so that they can implement a variety of ways, but just making sure that kids know that they're seen and that they're heard and that their voice and that their past matters. And through PLCs, we're also working to create lessons that can be taught team-wide. As Shelley and Olivia alluded to, there, and as Patrick mentioned at the beginning, there are many measures of success. It's not just MAP data or MCA data. We're continuing to take a look at how are people showing up, taking a look at the data, how we're keeping kids in the classroom, working on our restorative practices. And so every week we meet, we call it the green team, to keep kids in the green. And that it's our social worker, our counselor, our behavior specialist, myself, and taking a look at at students that are needing additional support and how can we best help them. We're also taking a look at student and family feedback, and taking a look quarterly at each individual student within the class. So for example, I'm a fourth grade teacher. I'm identifying where I'm at with each kid. Am I in establishing a relationship, maintaining, or restoring if something's happened? So continuing to take a look at where am I at with each student, and then what does that mean overall? And also, as mentioned before, as walking into the classroom, being able to see those learning targets and those objectives related to language, our students continuing to use the Spanish language within the classroom, as well as just some of those formalized assessments that were previously mentioned. So I'm grateful to be here. I'm grateful to collaborate with my colleagues. Yo soy porque nosotros somos. I am because we are. And I'm grateful for everyone's work on behalf of our children. So thank you for allowing us to share tonight.
Thank you, Corey. Just before you step aside, anybody have a particular question right now? Well, I have one.
Yes,
so you set it up, but we didn't get the answer. What is recommended for reading at home?
What is recommended for reading at home? Well, 20 minutes of reading a night, the average would be, is amazingly fantastic. And the other recommendation would be just for every family to be reading with their children in whatever their home language is. Additionally, creating opportunities that aren't punitive related to reading. So if a kid wants to read 40 minutes one night, fantastic. And maybe they, so it doesn't need to be so prescriptive that there's a log and everyone has to track it, and because we don't want to kill the love of reading, And so we just took a look at what are a lot of best practices, and once again, not everyone agrees with that. Not all the research would agree, but we had to have something because it was confusing if people had multiple children within our school, and as people went from kindergarten to first to second to third. And so I'd be happy to share that document with Aston if he wanted to share it with the board.
Thank you, Corey. Right.
Hello, I'm Carrie Schwiedering, principal at Peter Hobart, and I'm going to take just the next few minutes here to share a little bit about looking back from the 18-19 school year, about what went well for Peter Hobart. And there's a number of things that went well at Peter Hobart, and one for the grounding work is around relationships. And with relationships, one of the pieces that helped do that for us was around restorative practices. And with restorative practices, a number of things built on that idea around responsive classroom. And with that work, what helped us accelerate that work was where we saw the benefit was in our incidences, and that was similar to, and I know Shelley and Olivia talked about that too, but we saw a significant drop in our incidences. So we, in 17-18, we had about 522 incidences, and we went down to 155 incidences. And that may not mean a whole lot for somebody at home. Like, does that mean, was that a lot? Was that not a lot? But when we talk about incidences, for us, it's really just time out of class. And so it could be, just somebody stepping out to actually even have a conversation, which could be really a beneficial piece. But really, for us, it's about how do we, we could have the most wonderful planned out lesson, but if a student isn't in the classroom, they're not going to have the exposure to that. And so it's all about the work that it takes for us to do that work, to really build the relationship and create that community in our schools so that students are learning. We I'm really proud of the work that our community did around that. Another piece that were the challenges that we had, but I really also, in reflecting around that, is the challenges that we had helped us grow. And so that's part of where, when we have a mistake-friendly environment, that is where growth happens. And so one of the challenges that we had, and that I've been learning from, along with my team, is that the intent around, building, capacity and growth was that we had two separate kind of leadership teams. And so one was our professional development team, and one was our team leads. But out of that, there was some kind of disjointed pieces, and it didn't allow for us to really have a clear focus around students. And so I think that moving into this year, and I'll talk a little bit about that more in a moment, that it allowed us to move into kind of an opportunity for this year. So some of the challenges around last year was similar to both what my colleagues talked about, was probably trying to do too much, and a lot of people working really hard, but really trying to find the focus. And I think that the permission this year moving forward, and really has been the permission, but all along, but really to be intentional in finding that focus and moving forward in one solid direction. And so that will move us to this year around our strategies to accomplish our goal. So our goal for Peter Hobart this year, really, we focused around growth. And the idea around that for us this year is that we are looking at the idea around growth in relation to math. And so with that, we are looking at wanting to make sure that all of our students are growing, which obviously would make sense that all of our students grow, and that's important, but really making sure that when we talk about our students, that we are looking at them specifically as no matter where they are at, that we are specific at that students are growing. So we talk about typical growth as something that we would measure, but really at what does that mean for all of our students, and then demographically looking at that. So when we are looking at gender and race, as well as that are all of our students. And so when we talk about achievement gaps, how does that look across grade levels? How does that look at individual students? How does that look? And then if I am having success in my classroom or not, and if I'm teaching third grade, for example, but my classroom teacher next door is having success, and how does that look racially? How does that look by gender? If these patterns are showing up, then how can I have that trust and vulnerability to work with my team to basically be better, to be able to say, help me be better, because ultimately that is about our students. And so that is the work that we are doing. And so when I look at the different strategies to accomplish that, when I look at equity leadership, that is, to me, around putting children first. And so that's our hope around our new pedagogical leadership team. And Olivia talked a bit about that term of our PLT, our pedagogical leadership team, around IB, and the mission around having that be about our mission for this is about student-centered learning, and how the impact of what we are talking about as we pull our leaders together in our building, that this isn't long meetings about playground equipment. And as much as that can be very important, and it is, but are we having meetings about what is how is my teaching impacting student learning? And so when we become really focused about what our teaching is, how my teaching is actually impacting our students, then that will actually impact what our outcomes are, and then that is where our direction is headed. And so that's what that's how I am looking at aligning our leadership team. When I look at students at the center, and I've already talked a bit about restorative practices, we've already had a huge gain in that last year and the belief around that. So I'm just excited, and I know we've already spoke before at school board around restorative practices, but I'm really excited about the acceleration around the district with that work. And so I believe, again, with our mission around preparing all students to contribute to society. So that is absolutely connected to that. And so just I'm thrilled with the idea around how we can accelerate that work, and when we what we're already doing at Peter Hobart, but knowing through this, it's allowing us to connect to all of the other buildings. We meet monthly. We're looking at what each of us are doing and how we can help support each other. So again, it's that collaborative idea. So it's not just each of us doing this in silos. When I look at culturally relevant teaching, that one is the collaboration. So when I talked about that idea about a third grade teacher and whether I might be doing some really wonderful things or some areas where I know I need some support. So that's, again, the idea connected to our mission about ensuring that all students attain their highest levels of achievement. If I know by looking through my data, if I'm not meeting all students, how am I supposed to get better if I only know what I know? So that's where I have to be able to be in an area of, through relationships, to be able to know that I can trust my colleagues and be able to be in a place to ask for and expect to support. So I even love it as we're learning tonight, like, Corey, how can I lean on you to be able to gain ideas around how can I get my third grade teachers into each other's classrooms? And so these are these ideas about how do we collaborate and find and learn from each other to do that. The family and community engagement, I'm thrilled. I know we're working through the out-of-school task force, but the after-school programming with targeted services that we do at Peter Hobart already, we're just finishing up the first session where we have the Greatest Showman pieces that we're doing right now. We're doing Math in a Bag. We're doing Makerspace that we're working through. Next session, actually, Cam Muada is teaching guitar lessons, which I plan to take as well. But there's some just amazing things that are happening, and I think, again, connected to our mission about multiple pathways to success, that there is all of these things that are happening. And so when you think about any four of these areas about how we enhance the spirit of students, like, this is the way that we are going to achieve the goals. And so when we think about, typical growth, there's nothing typical about the way that we do things at Peter Hobart, and certainly not throughout our district. I know that we will achieve them. It's just a matter of being able to show them in all of the adaptive and technical ways that we need to. And I know that not any one of us can do that alone, but we need to be very intentional and focused on how we're going to do that. So that is my hope is, again, through the restorative practices, the way that we're going to be able to show that and collaborate monthly. PLCs, we are doing that together. We've changed our ways of doing that in a weekly, even though they are meeting individually within their PLCs, we are doing it in a collective space together so that we can actually support each other in a whole group. And they have been rewritten so that they are standards-based. And so my hope with this about how do we measure this is that, one, is that the students are going to tell us. So they will let us know about how we're doing in both adaptive and technical ways. Two is that it's going to be through collaboration, trust, and vulnerability. And three, as my other colleagues have said, is that it will be only through Ubuntu, which is that I am because we are. And that is it. Thank you.
Thank you, Carrie. Anybody have a question right now? Okay, thank you. Don't go far.
Good evening, Superintendent Osai, school board members. I'm the proud principal of Susan Lindgren, Clarence Pollock, and I'm last of the elementary schools to share. I just wanted to share with the home audience and everyone here tonight that this group, my group, our group of colleagues, we collaborate all the time. We call each other. We have meetings. I also want to include Frida Bailey in this group, our group, because we are such a helpful group. This doesn't occur in all districts across Minnesota. This is something very special that sometimes we take for granted, but this group, we don't take that for granted. We help each other. So thank you. I appreciate that. I wanted to share with what is going well at Susan Lindgren. This last year, the 18-19 year, being the new leader at Susan Lindgren, there was a lot of growing. There was a lot of getting to know people and building relationships, and we're continuing on that. Last year, our group for our school improvement plan came up with a very adaptive goal. I shared this briefly before as we met with the school board. What I mean by adaptive is it's just the opposite in a way of technical. A technical goal is we will have students reading by this level by the end of the school year. It's very technical. There's nothing wrong with that. We need both. But our group at Susan Lindgren really felt we wanted to, and we had permission from our superintendent to think differently, as you've heard from my colleagues. So we had a very adaptive SIP goal that everyone felt connected to and fully supported. This engaged us in excitement and collectivism around our common why. It was amazing. Many times in all of our elementary buildings, we have classroom teachers and we have specialists. We have special ed teachers, and then we have specialists, other types of specialists. And sometimes those teachers didn't always feel an ownership or didn't feel connected. And this last year was very, very different. We really got behind it. We honored and were given permission to focus on student agency, as you've heard before, using student voice, choice, and ownership. Wow, is that powerful to see that in action with kids when they feel like you are being heard. You're listening to me. You're valuing me. You're celebrating who I am. It's a beautiful thing to see. It is powerful to watch the beauty behind students feeling heard and validated in their thinking, ideas, and suggestions. They feel like they belong and people care for them. What are some of the challenges? For some educators, including myself in this, we were used to technical goals, so this was a little different. How do we measure this? Yes, we feel good, but we still have to have some accountability measures behind it. And that was hard for some of us to not necessarily get behind. We got behind it, but it's like, okay, how are we doing? I think we're doing okay. We're feeling good, but how can we build some accountability? An adaptive goal, you have to look deep within yourself. It's not a technical goal. I've got my class here. You have to think of who you are and look deeply into yourself as an educator. What are you going to do differently? Not what are the students going to do differently? How am I going to fix this? How am I going to do things differently as the adult, as the facilitator in the room? I believe and feel this meaningful goal pushed us to think differently and see the positivity along the way in many different forms with our learners. Another wonderful thing that happened last year at Susan Lindgren, our previous mission statement, our school mission statement, was excellent, but it was very, very long. It was almost a paragraph long. So we went through a process of getting ideas, suggestions, word choices. We spent a lot of time on this. I'm very proud. I know that the team at Susan Lindgren is very proud of this, and I'd like to share it. Collectively, we nurture and inspire all learners to thrive socially, emotionally, and academically in a equitable and inclusive environment. And that is up on our office wall as family members and community members come in, because that's where all of our work is connected to. Moving on to strategies to accomplish the goal. This year, we started off with our adaptive goal, but we talked about relationships. How can we, the adults in the building, be in relationship with each other, in a trusting relationship? Because once we model that, the students will see that. They'll feel that, and they'll get behind that. A very simple activity that I started the year, these are just 3 examples. I had the teachers fill out, what does trust feel like, sound like, look like to them? And here's just some examples. And these are put up as daily affirmations at our 2 copy machines. As teachers come up, they are plastered all over the wall as they're waiting for the copies or different things to come through. And they can remind themselves, this is what my colleagues feel like trust looks like or sounds like. And you might say, well, Clarence, that seems kind of a simple activity. It was simple, but extremely powerful to get us to think about, what do we really think trust looks like and feels like? It was a great way to start the year. So for the 2019-2020 strategies, as you see, promote collectivism and self-efficacy. Collectivism, working together, honoring our differences, the race of our students, the background of our students, but showing up vulnerable, modeling that, because that is what students are going to learn from and feel, hey, he hears me, he sees me. I was glad to hear what Dr. Duffy said earlier. Students come up to me and they come up to my colleagues, but it's like, they know that I care about them. They feel that, they see that, and it's the actions that speak louder than the words. So again, that's what we're about. So going to students at the center, creating a student-centered community. We just had our first Spark Assembly where students can share their talents, whether we had a hockey player, we had some kung fu, we had some beautiful singers, and a little acting. And we will have this 4 times a year where students can get up and share their talents, and we honor that, we celebrate that. Susan Lindgren, this first Spark Assembly was amazing. The students were so supportive. We also had a parent that couldn't quite get there in time, and I could see, as well as a couple other staff members, oh, she needs to sing again. And we honored that because that's important, and she will remember that for a really long time, that I was able to perform in front of my mom. So things like that we take for granted. That's why I'm sharing it tonight. We, like my colleagues, we have combined our equity and our PD with our team leaders. So we have one team because we want to be speaking and working together instead of, here's what this group is doing, here's what this group is doing. We're still in the growing process of that, where we are having teachers come up with professional development needs and wants for Susan Lindgren, and having them be some of the leaders instead of maybe myself or Ilis Saxena or Emily Crook as some of other people getting up in front and sharing their talents. We also, Susan Lindgren has the privilege of being part of the Terrific Kids program with Kiwanis, and I just presented at their luncheon on Friday. And wow, it was a really moving experience for me to kind of show off Susan Lindgren and our students and what we are about in our action and volunteerism, which is about totally falls into the IB world, but where we want our students to be. And these individuals were so appreciative of what we're doing at Susan Lindgren and the other sites, so I wanted to share that as well. We are currently, in 2 days, going to be collaborating with my colleagues Sylvie and Gao to, as some of the other schools have done, to bring in how can we use and look at data instead of, oh, we took this test, here's the data, we took this test, but make it more relevant, and how can we take that data and put it into our teaching? How can we change our teaching? So I'm really excited about this journey that we're about to start officially on Wednesday. We will have more than just one time, but I'm excited about that collaboration. Building trust. This year, we are building trust in every different way we possibly can. We are doing it in meetings. We are working together. Susan Lindgren has some of the best teachers around. We have wonderful teachers in all of our sites, and it is amazing to see the collaboration, the dedication, the creativity. And like my colleague Corey said, and Carrie, I'd like to learn more because we have experts within our building that just to go and visit, we take that for granted, but that's so powerful. We can learn from each other, and we do learn from each other, but we have to take the time to get into each other's classrooms and be okay with that. It's not a competition. It's about how can we collectively become stronger and better in serving our students. And that is what I have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Clarence. Any particular questions right off the top for Clarence? Go ahead, Ann.
This isn't really, I just love the Spark Assembly. I love the name of it. I think that's an amazing thing. And I just, for all of you, all the ways that you highlighted the sort of sparks, the giftedness. I think there was another, talking about English as an additional language, like just thinking about the giftedness of all of our students, I heard come through in all of your things. So that's more of a comment than a question, but it applies to everyone.
Yeah. Any other comments or questions? Thanks, Ann.
I do appreciate that you had to do this again because we did have time an hour beforehand to really be in deep conversation with each other, and I really appreciate your multiple perspectives as how we're going to serve all of the kids in our community. And I really want to compliment you all at how you work so diligently to model relationship with each other as colleagues, with your staffs, with having, like you were talking about earlier, the classroom teachers where a lot of the learning happens, but the support pieces, media, music, Fayette every day, it's all integrated. It's the whole child. Every single piece of it is important. And oh by golly, I'm sorry that the construction was so hard on people, but we're all going to get there in the end. So thank you for bearing with all of that, and more to come.
Yes.
I had two questions. Anybody could take them. One is, it'd be helpful, I think, for the audience at home to get an example of culturally relevant teaching, because we say that a lot, but, to just have a simple or not simple, simple's better, example of what that means, I think would be helpful. So I'll just start with that one first.
I'll go first. Culturally relevant teaching is looking at our current teaching practices, analyzing them, and looking at our audience of learners. They are not all white students. There are Black and brown Indigenous students, and how are we making the learning as culturally relevant as possible for them? Are they seeing themselves in curriculum? Are they getting different perspectives? Is it just one main perspective, or are we celebrating the differences and seeing the differences in making it more real and relevant to them.
So my second question is, I understand that we're doing some things with Yoga Calm. You know, we hear a lot about mental health and stress and anxiety in students, and it sounds, I just like to hear somebody talk more about what that is and why we're doing it and the impact you're seeing from it.
I'll go again, and then I'll let my colleague. I just had Yoga Calm come in and train all the teachers at Susan Lindgren during Back to School Workshop Week. Kathy Fulminio, she is amazing. She is a breath of fresh air. She teaches ways to incorporate just simple breathing when we're elevated or when we're frustrated. I remember parents would say, what is this thing that my son keeps pulling out, but there's nothing there? Oh, that's the breathing ball. And you don't have to have a breathing ball, but you can practice the deep breaths and the different yoga poses. And it helps kids get the movement and getting them focused so they can pay attention and get more out of the learning. Because when you have to move, and you don't have a chance to move around and get those feelings out, it's really hard to focus.
We too have worked with Yoga Calm, and for us, it's focused on mindfulness. And last year we did a rollout of across K2 and 3-5. We had different lessons that we translated into Spanish, but basically giving adults the language first. I mean, teaching adults what triggers you, and to think about what's happening and why is that happening, and as well as the students. And so one of my favorite stories last year was, a first grader, well, what happened that made you, push your friend over there? Well, my amygdala got triggered. Okay, but basically it's just encouraging the kids to really think through, there is a reason that we all react to certain things, and giving them the language for that and making it part of the learning rather than it being a punitive thing. And helping them see how that when they get into situations in which they can start to feel tense or nervous, what are some strategies to help them de-escalate? Because we want them in the classroom, we want them being productive in the classroom, we don't want them in the red, as we like to call it. So we've focused a lot on green, yellow, and red, red being when you're triggered. So.
Anyone else? I just want to thank you for giving us so much of your evening and the time you spent getting ready to be here. We are so fortunate to have you as the principals in our schools. Our students are just blessed, as are we. So thank you so much for all the work you do for our kids. So next up is the city land usage at Peter Hobart Elementary. I want to thank both of you for your patience as we finally got to you on the agenda. Hope you found it as interesting as we did.
Superintendent Osai, Chair Gores, school board members. As you know that the city's been working on this project of putting a bike path over the rail system by Peter Hobart, and we've got to a point where we know what the plan's going to look like. We know how it's going to be developed. We know that when it's going to start. And one of the things that I have to say to you right now is working with Mr. Jack Sullivan, who's the city engineer, and he's going to be talking about this briefly, is that they always ask the question when we had our meetings, when is the best time we should start our construction? And my response has always been is when we start ours, because the school's going to be closed down, we are not going to have a lot of interruptions, and we would like to see a lot of your work done during the summertime when we shut down Peter Hobart next summer. So they were very, very gracious of honoring that, and they're going to be starting their construction at the same time. We're going to be starting ours next summer. It's going to be a crazy summer at Peter Hobart with a lot of things that are not going to be open and available. But what we want to talk about today is because of the fact that they need to go on our land, our property, they had to do an assessment of our property. because they're going to be for several months taking a portion of our land to do their project. And in order to do that, they're going to have to build a road and so forth. And I'll let the city engineer, Jack Sullivan, talk to you more about it. But today we want to just kind of share with you what this agreement is. It's called the Memorandum of Agreement for compensation for the property use of part of the Peter Hobart land that's in the back area of Peter Hobart for the duration of their project, which is a little bit longer than ours, because ours is going to last through the summer, and theirs is going to go on for several more months because of the fact that it's a bridge that they're building. So with that, I'll have Mr. Jack Sullivan, who our the city engineer, talk about this portion of the memorandum of agreement.
Thank you, Tom. Once again, Jack Sullivan with the engineering department at the City of St. Louis Park. I've been working with Tom and others from the school district, Carrie as well, for well over a year now on this project. And maybe just to give you a little bit of background of what we're trying to do here, one of the strategic goals of the City of St. Louis Park and from our council is increasing mobility through the community. And mobility means, in their mind, starting with pedestrians, then bikes, mass transit, regional transit, and then working their way to the automobile. We have a number of railroads and highways in our community that create barriers for getting mobility, for getting across town, and even in this case, getting to Peter Hobart School. I think about 1/5 of the school population lives north of the tracks, does not have access to the school or the park without crossing over the BNSF railroad tracks or working a number of miles around to get to the facility. So this was earmarked in the city's comprehensive plan and Connect the Park active living project for a number of years now, connecting Cedar Lake Road down to the high school where we are today, and eventually down to the Southwest LRT Wooddale Station. So really connecting our community all the way up to 394 and down to 2 schools, a number of parks, and eventually down, like I said, to the mass transit facility. What we're proposing to do with this project is tie into the, well, still ongoing, but almost completed Cedar Lake Road reconstruction that's going to have enhancements to bike trails, enhancements to the sidewalk along there, create a multi-use trail down Edgewood, take a bridge up and over the BNSF rail line, land in next to Peter Hobart School in the Dakota Park, and then work our way down via bike lanes and on-street bike facilities down here to the high school. You can see the graphic here to kind of ground everybody. Excuse me. To ground everybody, you can see the high school baseball field there kind of in the center. Peter Hobart School is just to the left. It's kind of that unique shaped piece of property there. And then a number of pink, red, and yellow lines kind of representing the trail connection that we're trying to do. We have a very circuitous bridge approach. One reason for this is that we want to make it ADA compliant for all users, whether you're jogging, walking, taking a stroller, a bicycle, making sure that those grades are accessible to everyone. And then finding a way to land in the both in the park on the south side and then some of the land that's available to us on the north side. These are a couple of illustrations that kind of show the perspective. Now this is looking from the north to the south. So in the background is the Peter Hobart School and the neighborhoods to the south and the ball fields. This is kind of almost looking on top of Peter Hobart School, kind of looking towards the ball field. You can see the bridge structure that's being proposed in the background there. Another viewpoint kind of looking at street level. This is kind of utilizing an elevation from Edgewood itself, kind of looking south, and the bridge that you see and the railroad tracks in Peter Hobart would be in the background. And then this is kind of looking from the east side of and just north of the ball field, kind of looking back west towards Peter Hobart School. One of the reasons, as Tom indicated, that we're here tonight is we're looking to have a temporary use of a small piece of the school property, and that's the kind of the area in the teal color at the very top of the screen here. You can see that this wedge-shaped piece of Peter Hobart School is kind of flanked by Nelson Park on the west, the ice rinks and other uses to the west, and then to the ball fields in Dakota Park and the dog park to the east. We had looked and talked with the school district staff on a number of occasions about what is the best access road. We need to get back to this facility to build it. We could take city property and go up along between the ball fields and Peter Hobart. We could look at going to the west side. After much discussion, there was determined that there's a lot of kind of synergy or uses between Peter Hobart School and the asphalt trails and the fields that are currently the ball fields out there. A lot of PE classes happen, a lot of outdoor learning classes happen, and to utilize that as the access or haul route that we would need to get our equipment back to this site and get the materials back there would really separate those uses and no longer have the school grounds being utilized in that work that they can have with the school district between the school and the park. As Tom mentioned, our project will be longer than just the summer time when the school is unoccupied. We're going to be starting with some preliminary activities before school is out, ramping up with the noisier, more restrictive operations throughout the summer, and then kind of ramping down in the fall. So our presence will be there during the late spring school time as well as the early fall school time. And we really thought that trying to utilize that trail and those other areas that everyone uses on a daily basis would not be the best for the park users or the school. So that's why we've kind of started to migrate to the west side and use more of Nelson Park and utilize some of the area at the very top of the Peter Hobart property. So what you're seeing here is this gray line. It's a haul route that actually was a very similar roadway that was utilized during the previous construction activities at Peter Hobart. We would be replicating this very similar. We would be putting up rather large chain link fencing to separate the vehicle and construction site and operations, storage of materials, those type of things, from the school grounds, from the playground, from the various hard surface fields and also grass fields that are out there. This would be a gated off, fenced off area that would then all be removed at the end of the construction process and replaced back as it is today. Some of the activities that would be utilizing this roadway is, like I said, hauling of material back there, steel piling for foundational support, concrete, the rather large overhead steel truss would also be delivered this direction. Gaining access from this side is most appropriate. And so this is what our ask is tonight, is to have you entertain the idea of us, in essence, renting this land for this construction duration so that we can successfully and efficiently build this bridge and the accompanying structures associated with it. And that is all I have for tonight. Just wanted to introduce the topic and would be welcome to take any additional questions you have on it.
It's not a question, but I have a comment.
Go ahead, Ann.
I mean,
Go ahead, Ann.
Jack knows me. I live in the neighborhood that is going to be benefiting from this bridge primarily, and have for a long time. And we've been waiting for this bridge, I think, since the day we moved in, and it's been on the Connect the Park plan for, I think, that long. And I cannot underestimate how important it is for our neighborhood and the other neighborhoods to the north. We have no access to the trail between, if you can imagine where the JCC is in the east, to Virginia Avenue, so past the middle school. To the west, we don't have any other way to get to the trail. So besides getting across, we can't get on the trail. And then for what I think you said, about a fifth of kids going to Peter Hobart, living on that north side in my neighborhood and several other neighborhoods to the north, and then to the high school.
Yeah.
Additionally, so plenty of high school students now have a basically straight shot over that bridge and then down to Dakota. So I could not be more thrilled. I'm happy to support this small ask, I think, for the city, because I think this is going to have a really huge positive impact on a lot of folks living on that side, myself included.
Jack, was the lighter blue area the area that you're asking to use temporarily on that map? I can't quite see it from where I'm sitting.
Yes, it is. That is the area that we are asking to use. Right now, if you're not familiar with the site, it's partially in grass. It's partially also in some vegetation, lower brush, some trees back there. It's kind of partially as it abuts the Cedar Lake Regional Trail that runs parallel along here. So it's an area that we understand doesn't get used probably or programmed as much as some of the other adjacent areas, the paved parking lot kind of play area, the actual playground itself, or some of the other, I guess I'll call them green learning spaces. I think where I hear that some of the students go out there and, would be able to have an outdoor classroom on a nice day, as well as not impacting, like I said, some of the running track that ends up happening around the baseball diamond. I believe that's the PE classes and some of the other classes use that on a daily basis throughout the better times of the month. And obviously it's paved, so it's a little bit drier than maybe some of the, and get out there a little earlier in the spring and stay a little later in the fall. Yes.
So the lighter blue area is the area that you, in essence, said the city wants to rent in order to complete this project. For what period of time are you roughly thinking you're going to need to rent that land?
And that's a good question. We are have currently indicated in the agreement that we're going to need this. I don't remember the exact dates, but I'll just tell you kind of generically speaking where we are in this process with the city. It's we are moving towards final design, and part of final design requires us, this is a federally funded project. We have about $3 million of federal dollars to help offset some of these costs. Requires us to get the appropriate both permanent and temporary, in this case, temporary easements from all the impacted property owners along this before we can go out to bid. We want to go out to bid in January timeframe. We have some tree removal that has to happen adjacent to this site, and that has to happen before the end of March. Reason for that, that's typically when your birds start to nest, and we don't want to impact those spring nestings. So we have to do some tree removal. That's that kind of February, March timeframe. There'll be a little bit of a pause in the project, and then when schools kind of lets out, or about when school's letting out, that's when we start ramping up with our construction. We anticipate to be mostly off the site by the end of the year 2020, November, December timeframe.
So you're thinking roughly the 2020 year?
Right. So the short answer is about a year.
Okay. And I'm looking here at least this was in our packet, it's a memorandum of agreement, St. Louis Park Trail Project. Is that the proposal?
That is correct,
Okay.
yep.
I have no problem with the idea of you renting it. I have no problem with it for the year. I have no problem with the concept. I have some problems with the language in the agreement because it talks about a conveyance, it talks about title, it doesn't have a time period in it. It doesn't really say to me as a lawyer that you're renting the space. It makes it sound like we're giving you this land, and that's not what we're doing. So I think there needs to be some rewriting of this, but I just will say the concept I don't have any problem with.
Thank you. We can continue to work with the staff to refine the language in that.
It's a great project. We need to do this project, and it's certainly going to benefit our families and students, but the contract language matters. And so we just need to have your attorney and our attorney and our chair work together to fine tune it, because words matter, and what you think you thought you were saying from the legal perspective isn't actually what you said.
Yep.
I would also, I would hope to see some language in the memorandum that specifies the steps that the city will be taking to put up protections along that area for our students. Because if you're going to be there with construction equipment and workers when our kids are at recess, for example, or doing some of these outdoor activities, I want to be really clear about what the city is saying that it's going to do to protect our students and to cordon off your activities.
And just to elaborate on that, I think that would be great that we kind of explain that better in the document. What we're proposing is very similar to what you're seeing along the Southwest LRT light rail right now. If you've driven near Louisiana or more, probably in some of the other communities, we're seeing somewhere in the neighborhood of about a 6 to 8 foot tall chain link fence that would be gated down at 26th Street to have access, so that area is completely cordoned off. Snow fence or anything lower than 6, 8 foot is not appropriate. Obviously, with just with everybody, kids and adults. Yes.
In me too, imagining what this language looks like, an assurance that no city or construction activities extend beyond that fence.
Perfect.
And I do want to stress that I'm glad you brought that, because this is something that we talked to the city about quite a bit, is how we're going to make the site secure and safe. Because as you can see, the playground's on that side, a lot of activities go on that side. So when we talked about it, we just, as a school district, we said we wanted the highest fence that you could put there. We want to make sure that it's a separate entrance. We want to make sure that there is no cross traffic. And that's why we felt that was the best side, because of the fact that it does stay away from the school itself, and it's going to happen during the school time. So we put a lot of, we love to share our minutes with you, because we met, Carrie and I and City met a lot, and I'm glad that you're voicing what you're saying, because that's how what we said too. Exactly. We may not put it in writing now. That's good to do that, but we voiced it, if not 1,000 times.
The lawyer in me would like it in writing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jack. We really appreciate your being here, and we're excited about the project, and we're going to work all the details out.
Thank you very much, and I would like to thank Carrie and Tom, too. We've worked a lot with them over the last year, and they've been a pleasure to work with, and it's brought this project very much further along than we would have been. I think maybe just one thing to kind of add to Carrie's kind of feather in her cap, we have some art projects that the school is partnering with. There'll be some art in this bridge. Their art teacher will be working to facilitate some art panels that will go on this structure, as well as some other artists work that'll be on this bridge structure that will reflect Peter Hobart School, the area, and the community at large. Student work, yes. So thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, so next up we have our policy development. First reading is policies 424, employee internet acceptable use and safety, and 407, employee right to know exposure to hazardous substances. Is that Flower or Aston?
So policy 424 was brought up at the last board meeting as kind of a new policy, splitting up policy 525. That was more of a generic overarching internet acceptable use policy. So this is now very specifically the employee internet acceptable use policy. I know we have a couple of cabinet members that have been working on this policy that will speak more to that. Policy 407 doesn't have any MSBA red line changes. We did notice that MSBA did combine the policy and the procedure. So if you see ours, it is still divided. So that I think is something that we can discuss tonight if we want to combine the two to match what MSBA has or not.
So are there any comments on 424? Or, yeah, Rick, you want to say something more? Go right ahead.
Board members, directors, superintendent, a number of cabinet members worked on this to separate out the things that were simply pertinent to staff and the responsibilities of staff in carrying out their roles as either teachers or professionals who work in the district and have to deal with the internet and devices and what their responsibilities and roles were. We also took the time to go through and update some terminology, remove MySpace and some other things that no longer make sense or as much sense as they may have when it was originally drafted. You're going to see another policy in the second reading on the student version, and I think it's going to be clearer for the readers when you look at it to see themselves and what I have to do, because I think it would be really cumbersome the way it was written previously for a student to look at this and then see, there's things about what the teacher would do or what, and then they'd lose themselves in what do I need to focus on as a student on the internet use.
So, Rick, as you and the team worked on this, just the one question I had, is there anything problematic that makes it hard to get the next round of bargaining done with any of our groups? Do we need to think about that as we're asking people to take a different look at, this is a new practice for us, right, to separate the two. So in our intention to make it easier for students and families, did we put a bigger burden on you and Patricia and the different bargaining groups?
I like that you're actually thinking that way. I don't foresee that. I mean, one of our challenges always is, is there enough time for training? Is there enough time, as more things get hosted on clouds and more devices are being used, there are digital natives and people who don't go there, and so our grounds workers, our food service employees, many of our Spark paraprofessionals are fully hands-on engaged with kids, and they're not, as savvy in using all of the technology, and so that, I would say, that isn't changed by this policy, but I think it's helping us now to just focus on what do students need and what do staff need.
Chair Gores, under Section 6 filter, there's a bolded section that talks a little bit about technology revenue related to restricting adult access to inappropriate materials. And I know our Director of Technology is here, Tom Marble. I'm just wondering if you could speak a little bit to what that means and how we would utilize those state dollars.
Superintendent Osai and board members, we participate in several programs where we get revenue from the federal government and the state government. One of them is called the E-rate program or Universal Service Fund, and then there's also a program through the state of Minnesota called the Telecommunication Access Grant or TAG program. And both of these require us to have filtering, content filtering in place, and there's certain levels of a basic level of filtering that is required in terms of certain content that we have to have in place and prove that we have in place in order for us to receive the dollars from those programs. So we have those in place. We have web filtering in place, and the thing about web filtering is it is not a 100% science. So we're making a good faith effort towards what is required of us to filter that content that's coming into our district.
Thank you. And that's the same that would be the same for 424, I'm assuming, as well.
Correct. It's in any access within our system to the internet is going through a filtering system. Doesn't matter if you're a staff member or a student.
I guess I wanted to know how these, this would be true for either of these policies, but I guess for this one in particular, how do we communicate this policy to our staff? I don't know if this is for Tom or for Rick or for Aston. And is it, here's our whole entire policy, or is there a handbook, or what's the procedure for actually communicating the policy so that we know that people are signing on to something that they understand?
A couple, each new employee meets with their human resource consultant as they're being onboarded, and they go through and they receive, the Internet Acceptable Use Policy, and kind of a high level. Here's what it means, and then they have the policy. Every year, all staff receive a training through our Safe Schools program, where they go through the policy, any changes, updates. They have to take a small quiz on some of the features that are in the policy and acceptably pass it. So we put the policy in front of them each year to make sure that they're seeing it.
And Rick, I'm wondering, when we adopt this policy 424, it's a new policy. and it will be in the middle of the year. Is it appropriate to send it out by email to all the staff so that they know we've just done it, so they're accountable to it this year as opposed to whenever your onboarding or next input happens?
Longer range will have a solution where employees, as board policies get done, much like an electronic handbook, they would receive a notice that something changed and they'd go and acknowledge it. But I'll work with the superintendent and communications department to maybe put it in the flow that there's a new policy, and they'd have a link to know that it was there.
Thank you for your work on this and for flagging us to the idiosyncrasies of having it all in one policy.
Are we talking about 524 now?
We are, first, we're going to talk about 407, the employee right to know, because it's a first reading. And as I understand, Flora, there are no recommended changes on that. So does anybody have any comments on that one? Go ahead, Mary.
I just want to comment that I think it's weird that we have a 407 that's just a purpose. All we have, and technically in the policy, is just this purpose statement without actually a comment on what the policy is. And so I think that that's what Flower was alluding to before. And so I'm wondering about whether we shouldn't actually combine the procedure, because the language of the procedure actually really tracks what we typically see as a policy, right? So yeah, I would like to just propose that we merge them, because as it stands, 407 doesn't actually mean anything to me, as it's written now. Or we should rewrite that first paragraph.
Yeah, options would be we have the purpose of 407, and you would think you'd put the general statement of policy in the policy, and then everything else would be procedures. That's a good recommendation. So let's try that for the second reading and see what that looks like, and then we'll see if we like it.
What about the definitions? Would definitions also pop up?
What do you think, Ann? I wasn't
I think definitions would also be, are you saying you're taking out, you want to move up the statement of purpose, the general statement of policy, right, to the actual policy?
Yeah. Yes.
And the definitions, I think, would go with that, which is the next thing down. Because that's not procedure, that's...
Let's take a look at that. Let's do that,
Yeah.
and then we'll see how we like the look of that on our next reading. Did you follow that, Flora?
Yeah.
Okay.
I like what Ann's saying too, because the general statement of policy doesn't mean as much without some of the definitions right with it.
Okay.
And then that would just leave those last two bullet points, the target job categories and the training schedule as procedure, which seem like procedures.
And they can be labeled as such when it comes back to us, procedures. Okay, all right, so next up is it's the second reading of 524, but Rick, have you made changes to 524? Have you pulled things out of 524 to put into 424?
Yes, we did. There's a number of sections, and then somehow or another, things that weren't really policies or procedures, but just like aspirational statements or quirky sayings were at the bottom. We removed all that as well and updated some of the pieces in the middle.
So go ahead, Mary.
I just have a question about the internet use agreement that students and parents are supposed to sign pursuant to this policy, right? So as a parent, when would I have signed that for my students? Could anybody refresh my memory on that?
So I did it August 2018 when I enrolled my 2 new kiddos. When I went into the office to enroll the kids, it was part of that packet. So I'm wondering if it is something that is part of the enrollment process when we do kindergarten roundup or when we open enroll. You know, a family moves in and they've got a 3rd grader who needs to start going to Aquila. That's when I think the mechanism is. The other time that I sign a lot of papers is when my high schooler and my middle schooler bring home various syllabi. Now, not every teacher requires that I sign it, but that is definitely that back-to-school mechanism. And in terms of how we're wanting to do lifelong learning for all of us, I would love to see a component where we're helping our parents understand how important internet safety is for children. The Star Tribune had quite a chilling article about the increase in pedophiles targeting teens online with severe ramifications. And in our state, 2 kids committed suicide because of being targeted by these perpetrators. So I think it's an opportunity to do a whole lot more robust lifelong learning related to this particular topic.
I would just, oh, I'm sorry. If I go ahead. Okay, I was just going to add that since, MSBA recommends that this is important and timely enough that we review this policy every year. In addition to Karen's suggestion, I would ask that we look into having parents have to do an annual internet, as parents and students have to do an annual internet use agreement, and to see how and where we maybe need to make this as timely as possible. But, we've had parents come to us individually and at open forum to talk about concerns about technology that their students are having access to. So I think that an annual opt-in or agreement might not be inappropriate here.
I was going to say, we can talk, I did spend a little time talking with the principals, and the internet usage, safety, and appropriate use is covered by the media specialists in working with students, especially at the elementary, and then the middle school and high school have this in their handbooks. But I don't know that now that you say that, I don't know how it's getting to home.
Since we do say that there is parental responsibility here and notification of student internet use, I'm wondering if maybe something is getting missed.
Just one of the things that I wanted to touch on is the fact that we are looking at going to an online enrollment process for new families in our district, but as part of this system is a way for families to update information online, and as part of this, we're looking at online forms that can be updated annually by families as well. So doing it through an electronic means instead of having to send a piece of paper home, sign it, and bring it back. So that's.
And like the student handbook at the high school level is only available online at this point, right? If I wanted a hard copy, I'd have to go find it and print it off myself.
I would say yes.
And I think that having an annual, I think that's a great suggestion, Mary, but I also think it matters what people understand that they are signing. And that was sort of my same question that I asked Rick on the staff policy, but is that how are we communicating what the policy is? Are we just saying, here's this policy? I mean, I think my kids got a Google account from the school district in 3rd grade, 2nd grade. It was really early in elementary school, and they couldn't understand what this policy says at that point. And so what are we communicating to our kids, and is it consistent among our media specialists or not? And so I think there's quite a lot of, complexity to how we're communicating it, and also the idea that we're not doing it often enough.
And then what do our parents and families and guardians understand about what the media specialists are teaching the kids? I mean, I think that to me, that's one of the biggest pieces that's missing here, is do parents and guardians have a full understanding of what this policy means with respect to the practicalities of how our kids are accessing the internet at school?
Chair Gores, so I appreciate the question. And as I'm listening to the discussion, one of the things that is resonating for me is that I think we have systems in place in which we are providing developmentally appropriate, particularly at the elementary age, instruction around digital citizenship and what it means. But I think what your questions this evening are drawing up for me is that there's a gap in how we're communicating to parents the education that we're providing. So I think what we'll have to explore is how do we communicate to parents what it is that their children are learning around digital citizenship? And then I think as we look at the secondary level, are we doing enough to make sure that we're educating students around digital citizenship, and families as well.
And I would say, to Karen's point, safety as well.
And I would just add, as a practical matter, the Internet Use Agreement says I have read and to understand the school district policies. Well, we're changing the policies once we get around to adopting 424 and 524. So in my opinion, we are going to need to have these signed off on again because the policies are going to be different from what they signed off on before. So whether that is an annual thing or not, it's going to necessarily be a thing for this new policy, it seemed to me, and any time we make other changes to it over the years, if we're going to honor what we're asking parents to sign. I'll leave that to the administration to figure out how to do that, but that seems to me the bigger question here. Or one of the questions, not the bigger question, one of the questions. Okay, so next up we have 806 crisis management. I don't think there are any changes to that, and we did look at this last time. Anybody have anything to say about it at this meeting?
Let me understand, Flower, I'm sorry, but so section 4, sample procedures included in this policy. Oh wait, I'm sorry, it's under miscellaneous procedures. There's the section D that's optional. I think that we can delete that, right?
Board members, looking at this, I believe MSBA, when they draft these things, they don't require that the board adopt their stuff word by word, so they may have option A, option B, option A, option B. I have seen in some of our policies in the past where those options weren't necessarily taken out, or so I think a review of this one to see, did we just leave in all the options, or did we actually pick the option we really believe?
Mary, are you suggesting we can delete 4 and 5, right?
Well, at least part of 5, and I would think 4, because it's just, yeah.
I would recommend that we, instead of the sample, that we insert what our emergency response procedures are connected to the, to fire, severe weather, intruder, that we just insert, our current format here, if that would be appropriate.
Just one thing though, I want to make sure that it's important that, so our policies are online and available to the public. I don't want to compromise our protection components of some of these details to the general public, because we wouldn't necessarily want to make ourselves vulnerable in any capacity. And that's all I'm going to say about that. I think you're getting my drift.
And that would align with what our other practices to keep procedures separate and not posted. And I would just generally say that I think that this part's going to be taken care of because we're deleting it. But whenever there's a reference to an MSBA model policy or an MASA model policy, I would prefer that we include our actual policy if we have one, because to the extent that people cross-reference things, I want them to be able to go to exactly what our policy is, right, and not an MSBA model policy.
So Mary, if I understand, when this comes up if we're ready to have this on the action agenda today, what we're going to, the proposal is to amend it to delete 4 and 5. Or do you want to have a third reading and have it come back that way?
Well, I think, along with Karen's comments, if we could have just another look at the procedures that are included in here to see if some of that language should not be removed from publication and put in a separate procedures document.
So
Like
I hear you.
H, yeah.
Anybody object to having this go to a third reading? No. Okay, that's what we'll do. We'll put 806 on a third reading. And if, all right. I see no other comments on the policies at this point in time. We'll move on to the consent agenda. Is there anything on the consent agenda that anybody wants to pull off for discussion? Seeing no hands raised, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Moved by Karen. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Ann. All in favor? Aye. Carries 6-0. Next up, we are up to the action agenda. On the action agenda is the use of facilities cooperative agreement. However, based on our that's different, right? That's the other one. Okay. So it is recommended that the school board approve the cooperative agreement between the City of St. Louis Park and ISD 283 relating to the use of facilities for community education and parks and recreation programs as presented. Let's get a presentation first before we have the motion.
What this is in the past, for decades, we had 2 agreements with the city. One was for use of our facilities, and the other one was the joint powers of community education. What this agreement does is it takes the facilities part of the agreement and actually just brings it up to current with the actual sites and buildings and things that are part of the agreement. And it takes the joint governance piece of community education and actually just reduces it to a paragraph. And what it takes out of the original agreement is just pages and pages of how the Community Education Advisory Council operates. So basically it's the same, in essence, it's the same as the 2 agreements, just with a lot of extraneous things removed.
So Chair Gores, members of the board, I'm recommending this evening because we had an agreement in which we were not adhering to and it didn't reflect what the current reality is. This agreement was developed in conjunction with the school district and the city to reflect what we actually do from a joint facilities usage standpoint.
Let's just get your name spelled right on it.
Well, that piece is not struggling. Yeah.
And SEAC has seen this a couple of different times, the Community Education Advisory Committee, and actually I think we saw it maybe on the agenda of one of the joint meetings. I've seen it like 4 or 5 times, so it's been seen quite a bit, yeah.
So, and this went all the way back to when I was newly elected for the first time, and Greg Lindbergh was newly elected, and we had been talking about it for quite some time, so I'm really glad to see we've gotten to this point. Thank you, Lisa.
All right, is there a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Jim. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Ann. Is there any discussion, any further discussion on the use of facilities cooperative agreement? Okay, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Carries 6-0. Next up, we have the labor agreement custodial services. It is recommended that the school board approve the employment agreement between Independent School District number 283 and the school service employees SEIU Local 284 CTW for school custodial personnel for the 2019-2020 and 2020-2021 school years as presented. Rick.
Again, Chair, members of the board, Superintendent, thanks for the opportunity to talk through this. I want to bring a couple highlights of this process, but I also want to just, because we talk about these things in by themselves and just like, okay, here it is and here's what we did. I want to take you through a little bit of processes of how we got here, and then how we go through each of these. And so this contract, which we're bringing you tonight, started actually back in April. And so as we meet in April and we go over with the finance department and we're talking about the budget that we're putting together and the revenue we have and the students that are coming and the square footage that we're going to have, we start putting together our proposals for the negotiations for all of our contracts. We met with the board. We set out parameters for where we would go into bargaining. We actually started this contract on June 25th. We met roughly every 2 weeks. We had a tentative agreement on September 26th. Then we go into the method of preparing all the documents you have in front of you and that the union used to hold their votes and meetings. They ratified the contract on October 17th. It's before you tonight for your consideration on October 28th. If it's approved tonight, we go into production mode. We have to build salary schedules, get people exported over to payroll. By November 15th, we would have new rates and retro. By November 28th check, which is the last check of the month, we'd have the benefit all the benefit changes implemented. And then by December 31st, payroll would be able to run retro on any overtime or vouchered hours. And so we come to you tonight and we talk about a contract we settled, but it's a process that starts in April and ends in December. And it just boggles my mind that let's say the board approves it tonight, we're still going to be touching this thing all the way through December. So anyway, great contract. They worked hard. The district brought a number of things for people to consider. One of them was about creating a salary schedule that would attract and retain custodians. I would say, along with EBD teachers, right now custodians are the hardest to hire, which was not the case years ago, but it's very hard to convince someone that they should come and be a custodian. Once they get here, there's a challenge of getting people to stay, and when they stay, then they stay forever. But there's a lot of turnover in finding whether this is your niche. So we worked hard to get reasonable starting salaries. We also put a lot more money, or tried to put more of this package to build a career ladder, so people would see this as, I might have started off as a custodian, but I could become a custodian 2, I could become a custodian level 3, and keep moving up and not have to go get a different job somewhere else. And so we hope it has that effect. I think the custodians also saw some of their own contract provisions hindering their own employees' satisfaction with work. There were provisions in the contract that allowed for up to 30 days of vacation, and it was almost unmanageable to staff because you couldn't allow enough people off to cover the number of days they had with the summer cleaning and the tight schedule of the school year. And the union agreed to lop off that 30-year top step and have the maximum accumulation at 25 years for newly hired employees because they saw it was difficult and it was hard, putting a hardship on the people who were there. You'd have a 5-man crew running with, 5-person crew running with 3 people because we had somebody out sick and somebody on vacation and a lot of things going on. So they saw that too. And it's not always that a union will step back and take those what could be considered concessions, but they saw it as increasing their work life when they were here. So there was a number of things like that I thought were very innovative for the group to take on. Also with training requirements, we've had a difficulty sometimes in getting people to progress to the right level of boiler's license. And in the past, if they got to a level that was supposed to have a license and they didn't have it, well, then we were stuck. And then the person was there and we couldn't assign them to do the real work of that level. And they saw the need to say, no, we can't have that. And if you don't get your license by a prescribed amount of time, you could be demoted back to a job title that you had the proper license to perform and pay grade. So some of those things I thought were due to, I think, strong relationships and, the ability to collaborate on solutions instead of just digging into positional bargaining. And I thought that was a tribute to them on their side as well.
Thank you, Rick, for all that hard work and for bringing the contract to us. Is there a motion to approve this contract?
So moved.
Moved by Mary. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Karen. Is there any discussion? I just want to also thank the custodians and grounds employees. They do such a fantastic job for us year-round, but especially it's always such a treat to come back after a break or after the summer and really see what a fantastic job they've done sprucing up what we have before our students arrive. I think it makes everybody feel valued to come into a building that is prepared.
And working through and around all this construction.
Indeed. Right, all in favor of the custodial services contract? Aye. Aye, opposed? Carries 6-0. Next up, we have the resolution to create an internal service fund for self-insurance. It is recommended that the school board approve the resolution to create an internal service fund for self-insurance as presented. Patricia.
Thank you. Chair Gores, Superintendent Osai, and board members. This is really something we talked through as we put together the budget last June, and we, in fact, presented the budget for this current fiscal year 2020 with the self-insured for dental amount, as is stated in the resolution, in the internal service fund. As we are working through our audit and preparing to bring that to the board next month, we needed this resolution to be sure that we had board action to move that dollar amount that's been in a reserve in the general fund and physically move it into an internal service fund.
Is there a motion? Moved by Ann. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mary. Is there any discussion? All right, all in favor? Aye. Aye. Opposed? Carries 6-0. Next up on the agenda is approval of the second reading of policy, and I'm just going to do these one at a time. 524, Internet Acceptable Use and Safety. Is there a motion to approve that policy?
So moved.
Moved by Karen. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mary. Is there any discussion on policy 524 other than we've had earlier in the meeting? Right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carries 6-0. Next up is, on the agenda, is approval of policy 806, crisis management. Based on our prior discussion, I understand that we are agreeing to move that off the action agenda and to a third reading.
So do we move to post? How do we do that?
Oh. I think we're going to probably move to table this, or I think it's a motion to table, and then we can bring it back whenever we want.
Yes.
All right, so is there a motion to table approval of 806 crisis management?
So moved.
Moved by Mary. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Karen. Is there any discussion? All in favor? Aye. That carries 6-0. We are up to communications and transmittals. Ann.
Karen and Mary and I hosted a listening session a week ago tonight, actually, at Lennox, and we had a nice turnout of 3 parents, 1 staff member, and 2 community members, if I'm counting right, in addition to the 3 of us. And mostly people were there to sort of share joys. We had a couple of questions about communicating of the new bathroom policy at the high school, a question about the proposal to do a second turf field, a parent who had a couple of questions about the Kids Place preschool and communicating of title services in elementary that I think were referred to the superintendent. And then we had a little bit of a discussion about the out-of-school time task force. And finally, we just had a couple of, we had a staff member who just wanted to say how much he loved his job. And in particular, and I think I can say this, this isn't confidential, that loves working at Lennox and loves the Lennox community, and especially the kind of multi-age, intergenerational community that is at Lennox. So that was fabulous. And then a community member who wanted to just give us props for the racial equity work that we're doing as a district. So it was a great listening session, a great discussion, good connections with community members. So thank you, Mary and Karen, for your help in that.
Sounds wonderful. Anybody else have anything? Joe has been nominated.
I've been voluntold to talk about, I'll make it brief since it's late. Last week we met with the city council. We've previously met with them annually. We've kind of moved that to, I think they call that biannually, twice a year, rather than twice a year. We meet twice a year now, so we won't dub it biannual because I'm not sure that's right. People can tweet at me if that's wrong. So we talked about a lot of different things. One of the things I remember the most is the discussion about vaping and what we could do and collaborate between the city and the schools to try to make some headway on this difficult issue. We've talked a lot about community education, so thanks Lisa and your team for being involved in that. Somebody else help me on what the other topics were. Start housing, yes. Housing is always a topic that we have, and we talked a lot about affordable housing within St. Louis Park and how that affects both the city and the schools and really the metro area in terms of having naturally occurring affordable housing, how we can sustain that, and then when there are developments, having affordable housing kind of involved in those developments. So yeah, I thought it was a productive meeting, and I look forward to you all doing that next year. Yeah, Cedar Lake Road Safety. So yeah, PSI, as we all know, has moved out to Cedar Manor, so we did have some discussions with the city about the increased traffic there and just the safety concerns with having kids there around rush hour. So there's more work to be done there because we're just only a month into the school year, so that will evolve also with the start times evolving, but we did have some discussion on that one. So thanks for the reminders.
So I just want to say that we are meeting, this meeting is happening on October 28th, and on November 5th, which is not tomorrow, which is Tuesday, but the following Tuesday, we have a local election, and it's really important that people figure out who's running, figure out where you stand on who's running, and vote. We have 4 seats open on the school board. The top 4 vote getters are going to win. We have several city seats open, including the mayor. I just had the great good fortune to take a civil rights trip down to Alabama and Mississippi and Tennessee, and I'm probably forgetting another state we went through, and was really reminded of how hard people fought to be able to register to vote. and how many roadblocks go in people's faces where we don't want their votes counted, and the great sacrifices that people made in order to be able to register and in order to be able to vote. So I really think here, it's really important that we vote, and I hope people turn out, get educated, and vote on November 5th. Mary, or Karen?
And then related to that, we are still looking for some volunteers for the Kids Voting Initiative at our elementary and middle school. So if you, I'm not sure, are the Sign Up Genius links on the district website at this point or not? Oh, yep, Matt's, yep. So, perfect. So if you've got some time on Election Day after you vote, help us out to help our kids vote. Thank you.
All right, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Moved by Mary, is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Ann, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Carries 6-0. Thanks, everybody.